Kate Morrison has been working as a cleaning lady in a restaurant for over a year and was used to the fact that it was a hard job. The woman's job description didn't just include cleaning the entire premises, but also helping in the kitchen by taking out the trash and washing the dishes. Meanwhile, Kate's salary was barely enough to feed her 3 children and make ends meet. But the worst part was that her husband chose to stay at his easy, low-paying job. Meanwhile, he did virtually nothing to help his children, who were forced to wear clothes bought at flea markets or thrift stores. But despite it all, the mother of many children didn't despair and kept her faith in the better tomorrow. This was partly because Kate had long gotten used to the fact that Simon only worried about himself and didn't care that his family was living in poverty. In addition to the 3 children, Kate's grandmother, Charlotte Edwards, also lived with the family. The woman had recently turned 90 years old, and she rightfully enjoyed the respect and love of her great-grandchildren. Fortunately, despite her advanced age, Mrs. Edwards was in good health and didn't need anyone to take care of her. However, that couldn't be said about Kate's kids, Ethan, Kyle, and Sally. Since the boys, Ethan and Kyle, had only 1 age-year difference, they could wear the same clothes. While being a girl, Sally needed new clothes. Unfortunately, Simon didn't want to understand any of this. He only ever wanted to spend money on himself and was convinced that raising children was solely his wife's responsibility. Therefore, the neglectful father could easily blow his entire monthly salary on drinks in a sports bar. What kind of father are you, Simon? When will you understand? You can't keep pretending like you don't have any responsibilities. I can't provide for the entire family on my own, Kate said in despair. But Simon was already used to his wife's nagging and knew that her anger would subside sooner or later. He knew that Kate was a kind and sympathetic person, and so he used her kindness as he pleased. "Mom, why are my classmates laughing at my clothes? Is it because I always wear Ethan's hand-me-downs?" Kyle asked with tears in his eyes. Hearing her son's words, Kate turned to the window and tried to pretend that everything was fine. But in fact, a hurricane of resentment for her husband was raging inside her, which at any second can turn into an unstoppable tornado. But Simon persistently continued to pretend that nothing was happening. He didn't even care that his youngest son was mocked for being unable to afford even a donut from the school cafeteria. Trying to justify himself in his own eyes, Simon blamed his wife for all the family's problems, claiming that it was all her fault for being unable to save up money. Meanwhile, Kate's grandmother chose not to take any of the spouse's sides, hoping to save her granddaughter's marriage, which was clearly falling apart. Obviously, things couldn't go on like that forever, and one day, Kate filed for divorce. Having received the news, Simon got visibly nervous. At first, he even tried to persuade his wife to give their marriage another chance. But when he realized that Kate was dead set in her intentions, he tried to interfere with their plans by deliberately delaying the divorce proceedings. Fortunately, Kate immediately hired a qualified lawyer who quickly put an end to Simon's sabotage and put him in his place. Moreover, Kate was horrified to learn that her husband intended to sue her for half of her parental home. So that's how it is. You live side by side with the person for several years and don't even suspect that one fine moment he may turn out to be such a scoundrel, Kate thought, rejoicing at her long-awaited freedom. Unfortunately, after the divorce, the problems of Kate's large family only multiplied. The woman now knew that she was all alone and could only rely on herself. The problems were partly due to the fact that Kate's grandmother fell ill and now required expensive meds. Meanwhile, Kate and Ethan grew by leaps and bounds, which meant that they would need new clothes soon. Unfortunately, Kate was so low on funds that she couldn't afford to buy anything. One day, while cleaning up at the restaurant, Kate looked at a pile of plates with leftover food that stood in the corner of the kitchen next to the waste bin. Taking a closer look, Kate was surprised to notice that many of the dishes were left untouched. Moreover, it wasn't just salads or appetizers. There were also plates with steaks, pieces of marbled beef, or tendered salmon baked in its own juice. Such an abundance of delicious food made Kate almost dizzy. On top of that, the unfortunate cleaning lady hadn't eaten anything since last evening, and thus her stomach was growling all day long. That's an idea. What if I bring a plastic container tomorrow and take home the food that the customers have sent back for some reason? Kate thought. She was very happy to come up with such an unusual idea. The head of the hungry cleaning lady immediately started calculating how much money she could save if she were to take the risk of bringing leftovers home from the restaurant. This way, I would definitely be able to buy a new jacket for Ethan and sign Kyle up for basketball. He's been dreaming of it for so long, Kate thought happily. So, the next day, the cleaning lady returned from work with a container full of delicious, nutritious food. Needless to say, the kids pounced on the food brought by their mother and devoured it in seconds. The truth was that the young members of the family were already rather tired of the corn tortillas their grandmother Charlotte kept baking for them. The next morning, wanting to build on the success of her venture, Kate brought to work 2 plastic containers instead of just 1. That amount of food was supposed to feed the family to satiety. And that's how it went since then. Of course, Kate took only those dishes that remained untouched by customers. The woman understood perfectly well that most of the restaurant's customers were wealthy people who didn't see a problem in sending back food or simply leaving it untouched. What didn't seem like a big deal to the wealthy customers helped Kate and her family make ends meet. All this time, the restaurant's chef, Henry Rogers, never reprimanded the young cleaning lady for taking home leftover food. Kate probably has a pet, or maybe even a couple of pets. And why should I worry about food that would go into the trash? It's already been paid for anyway, Henry Rogers thought. He had been working in the restaurant for over 15 years and was accustomed to treating life with a dose of irony and calmness. The chef knew that Kate never received any complaints about her work, and therefore he simply didn't feel like losing such a valuable employee. And so it went on for 6 months. During this time, Kate managed to save up enough money to buy clothes for not only Ethan and Kyle, but even for the 3-year-old Sally. Meanwhile, the young woman had repeatedly caught herself thinking that she did the right thing 6 months ago when she decided to divorce Simon. That scoundrel hadn't spent a single cent on his children for so long, and he even wanted to sue me for my house and sell it to settle his debts, Kate thought indignantly. Time went by, but Simon still remained a cunning, lazy person, accustomed to living at the expense of others. At some point, Kate decided to petition for sole custody of the kids to protect them from their father's harmful influence and hypocrisy. To do this, Kate Morrison turned to the same lawyer who handled her divorce. Alfred Green was rather experienced in family law and was considered one of the best specialists in his field. Discussing all the details of the upcoming trial with the client, Mr. Green couldn't help but notice the plastic containers with leftover food standing on the kitchen counter. The lawyer was well aware that Kate worked as a cleaner in the restaurant and therefore didn't ask where exactly those leftovers came from. But the important part was that Alfred Green knew the owner of the restaurant where his client worked. Thus, the lawyer decided to see Brian Miller, who took over the restaurant after the sudden death of his father. Of course, the owner of the restaurant used this occasion to treat his friend to a glass of wine and some appetizers. At first, the friends chatted about unimportant things, and only about an hour later did Alfred Green switch to a more pressing issue. "Did you know, Brian, that your cleaning lady, Kate Morrison, is taking leftovers home?" the lawyer asked with an embarrassed cough. "Yes, I actually knew that. The chef told me. I think she has a Labrador or a Doberman at home. I don't remember what exactly it was, but I don't care. She can take all the leftovers she wants. I have no use for them," answered the young restaurant owner with a smile. Actually, Kate's family is so poor that she eats this food herself and feeds it to her children and grandmother. Alfred shared and lowered his eyes guiltily. "What? How's that? Are you sure that's true?" Brian exclaimed and grabbed his head with his hands. The young man saw the answer to his question in the lawyer's eyes. He was sure the man was telling the truth. Therefore, as soon as Alfred went home, Brian called the chef and asked him to come over to his place. He wanted to get to the bottom of things. "Tell me, Henry, do you know who Kate is feeding the leftovers to?" Brian asked without any transition. "No, Mr. Miller. I assumed that she was taking it to feed her dog or some other pet." Henry answered, stammering on every word. The owner just shook his head sadly in response. The young man couldn't understand how the mother of 3 children ended up in such a terrible situation. Tormented by the feelings of guilt, he promised himself to help the poor woman, forced to eat leftovers from the restaurant kitchen. The next day, Kate was called into the owner's office, and her heart skipped a beat. Why did Mr. Miller ask for me? Did I do something wrong? Is he going to fire me? The woman thought anxiously. But when the owner of the restaurant handed her an envelope full of cash, the woman was both confused and astonished. Sir, there must have been some kind of a mistake. Are you sure that is all from me? It looks like at least 6 months' worth of my salary, Kate Morrison whispered timidly. There were tears in the woman's eyes, which touched the owner of the restaurant very much. No thanks needed, Kate. It's your money now, and you can spend it however you think would be best, Brian replied. In response to this, Kate smiled shyly, and then, plucking up her courage, invited Brian Miller over for apple pie and tea. Meanwhile, Kate's joy knew no bounds, and her mood was simply wonderful. Of course, Brian accepted her invitation and promised to come over for some pie. At some point, the owner of the restaurant caught himself thinking that he liked the young and strong-willed woman who wasn't afraid of facing her problems and found a way to provide for her family. Therefore, out of respect for Kate, Brian visited her the very next evening, bringing the lady a gorgeous bouquet of roses. It was probably then that the young people first felt attracted to each other. And it was that attraction that would lead them to the city hall just 6 months later, as the young people would decide to spend the rest of their lives together. But for now, Kate and Brian were simply enjoying a pleasant evening together and enjoying life to the merry laughter of the kids and the witty jokes of Grandma Charlotte.